What's new with RuneQuest? This is the newest thing right now, right? Cool.
Yeah.
I do not have this yet.
Who doesn't have this one?
Well, you
They're not sold out of the leatherettes.
Are we already?
They've only got the leatherettes left.
Oh,
That's not
well,
an
you
excuse.
guys are, gotta have a leatherette. The only downside is that the Louis, I love the Louis covers, so.
Well, not a chance to read it, but I am going to repeat it because it's just what I'm about.
Alright, Jeff, what's Gods of Fire and Sky?
So Gods of Fire and Sky, I think you guys all know this, it's the solar pantheon. It is Yelm, it's Yomalio, Urania, Lodrol, Polaris. Pretty much all those gods that have largely gotten a short shrift in previous material.
It's got, what's the yellow stool's name?
Yelorna.
Yeah, it's got her.
It's got Yelorna, it's got Dayzatar. Personally, I think the idea of Dayzatar adventurers is the ultimate bit. They just sit around, they do nothing, and when the rest of the party says to do something, they say, no. I'm not going to do anything, I'm going to sit and meditate. Yes, that's it. Yes. So anyways, it's you know, really, it kind of completes the player-focusing selection of cults. After that, really what we're looking at for cults are largely ones that aren't focused so much on likely player characters.
He's trolling us.
What?
You're trolling us.
I am trolling you.
When I wouldn't say troll, but I would be the correct trolls being the geek guy out. Is that the next one?
Well,
I don't want to get into this.
Slide.
So anyways, but get this one. It's wonderful. It is, to me, it's kind of more or less. I mean, it's not truly the last of the line there, but it kind of caps a big part of what I was trying to get done with the cults book, which is to give all the main player character pantheons that same degree of depth that you get for the Praxians of life.
Two questions on this before we wrap up. The first one, what is your, Jeff Richards, favorite piece of lore from this book?
The favorite piece of lore?
Your favorite piece of lore. It's yours. It could be something someone already knows. No, it's nothing.
Well, okay, the thing is it's kind of, you know, it's a cool question. I actually think of all of them, it was really thinking out how Locarnus and the Wagoneers work. And I went down a deep rabbit hole of thinking about the role of wagons and Wagoneers within the Lunar Empire, because that's basically where it is. And what is the connection between the Wagoneer cult and the various merchant and communication cults, because Locarnus is not, it is not a merchant cult. Locarnus is is an American, I think of it as Locarnus is the Teamsters. Right? Jimmy Hoffa is somewhere, used to be the head of Locarnus.
So they're truckers.
What was that?
They're truckers.
They're truckers. Yeah. They're truckers, which is very different. The truckers move goods here and forward. They don't care whether it gets sold or not. So I enjoyed that tremendously.
Second question, and it's only something which springs to mind. In relation to the cults and the lore in this book, what is a memory you, Greg Stafford, had of talking with Greg about something that would end up in this book? Actually,
there was a big bit of this. We were, I was out with, Claudia and I were visiting Greg in Arcata, Greg and Suzanne. Greg's flat, his house. So he was talking a lot about his obsession with birds. We spent a lot of time talking about how birds were so important to him in Glorantha. Partially from a mythological point of view, etc. Partially because he just was fascinated by birds. And so, you get all these bird references that come into this one, and that really is Greg was the one who ultimately convinced my wife that we needed to get chicken. It took a number of years. So, but for me, that was one of the associations that I have with Greg in this book, is hanging out in his place, talking about his collection of field guides for birds and him showing off chickens. So, take it for what it is.
Right. Well, I mean, that's everything that's new with RuneQuest, so thank you very much. Is there anything else you want to talk about? You here.
Oh, yeah. So the big thing that we're doing that you guys are all aware of is we are doing the new version of RuneQuest. What I don't know what we want to call it, but let's just call it the new version. And you know, part of the genesis of this is that I started working on what became our RuneQuest Glorantha back in 2015. So way back, so over now a little bit over 10 years ago, as part of the, as we were looking forward to getting moon design to come into Chaosium on that. That's about the time I started working on what became the current edition of RQ. And we had a lot of design goals in that. First and foremost is we were trying to make something that would work to rebuild as much of this audience back to RuneQuest, because you know the Chaosium RuneQuest, there hadn't been really a Chaosium associated or involved publication of RuneQuest. The last one was what, 93?
Mid-90s.
Yeah. So even by then it was, gosh, about a quarter century.
And I've been at arm's length for about 5 years. So.
Yeah. So it had been as a living publishing thing that had new content being created by the publishers for it. Chaosium RuneQuest was gone for 25 years. There was the Mongoose edition, which frankly ran the IP into the ground. I'll be very brutal about it. The Mongoose's January RuneQuest was disastrous.
Yeah.
It's certainly in terms of what it did to audience size, and it also completely abandoned the US audience. You had HeroQuest, you had Hero Wars, then you had the people that associated Glorantha and RuneQuest purely with David Dunham's computer games. And so we had to have a rule set and a kit that got everybody together. I think the current edition does a pretty good job of that. It has something for just about everybody. I know that there's probably a few people that really wish it had more focus on Paneltella or the E-Styles or something else, but it had a really, you know, it didn't have a big focused design for how are we going to get the next generation of RuneQuest players playing RuneQuest, because that wasn't the purpose of it.
So where is the focus of this version of RuneQuest?
Well, real focus for the what's going to be coming out is for people that are actively engaged in playing or running RuneQuest, right? So there's, if you kind of think about it with any TTRPG, you've got several different types of groups that are engaged in that particular product at a time. And you have folk like, certainly myself, and I would put Martin and Nick and a lot of us in this room into it, where we are so deeply invested in the IP that we can go off on flights of fantasy and do things and try to focus on stuff that really is irrelevant for 99% of the people that are going to come in and try to use this. And the new edition is focused more on supporting the people who were us 25 years ago or 30 years ago.
Quick experiment. Raise your hand if you've played RuneQuest or have been playing RuneQuest for over a year. Keep your hand raised. Over 5 years.
7 years? No, since 14.
10 years. 15 years. 20 years.
Pick the wrong audience, Jeff.
20 years.
No, this is exactly
This is the idea we want to get. That's good. Like 20 years, right? Like that. That's amazing.
Yes.
And
Keep going.
sorry. 25 years.
It must be, yeah.
30 years.
Yeah.
35 years. You're now older than me. You've been playing RuneQuest all the time.
Youngster.
40 years.
Yeah.
45. You're not even 45.
Well,
I
I think 35 is right.
45.
Yeah. I certainly knew what RuneQuest was.
Okay, and we're coming up to exactly doing what we've been playing it since 1978. Anybody?
But how do we get new blood in?
It's actually, it's quite, so.
Because obviously we all get
So where is, you mentioned that, you know, some people might have wanted RPG to have been Panatella. Where is RuneQuest standing?
So one of the things, and there was a perfect conjunction of events going on. And one of the things that happened is about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, Mike Burles and I started talking about what should be done for a relaunch of RQ.
Does anyone not know who Mike Burles is? Okay.
So
Yeah, but only since he came on board, only since he started this project. I didn't know before.
Yeah, no, sorry, I don't.
Okay, so Mike Burles is the creator of 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. Okay. Put it in, put it basically.
We've got him.
And Mike is probably, in my opinion, the single best TTRPG designer on a professional side out there.
Yeah.
I mean, he is amazing to work with. And he and I have been talking, because I managed to get him, he was an old RQ3 fan, going back to the late 80s, early 90s, dropped out of RQ3 because it had an absolute lack of playable content on Corantha. And I showed him an article that I think Mob had written for Tales of the Reaching Moon way back when, which he agreed with every single thing about it. So started working on that. Jason and I had also been looking at it, because after a product's been around for 10 years, as a designer, you can see, first, things that didn't work very well, or things that you could have done in a much more efficient manner.
And you've also got 10 years of feedback.
And we've got 10 years of feedback. And the other thing about it is that right now, certainly in the United States, the TTRPG market is in major transition. This is the golden age of RPGs. There has never been as many people playing TTRPGs as there are now. I mean, it is phenomenal. And for a variety of reasons, there is a not insignificant percentage of the people that have been playing exclusively 5th edition D&D that do not want to continue playing 5th edition D&D, or they want to try something else. And there's a range of things that they want to try. But one of the things that people get a really positive, strong feedback for is when they play RuneQuest and they deal with RuneQuest's combat system.
Yeah.
Ignore strike ranks for a moment.
Yeah.
But they deal with the RuneQuest combat system, that skill-based resolution system, and that everybody has magic instead of these really difficult to think through power progression paths where you basically are locked in very early in on your character's path, very early in on that.
Class system.
Well, it's not just class system. So if you look at Pathfinder, right? And you play does anybody play Pathfinder? So if you look at a video game, in most video games we have that power progression tree that goes forward there. Most of them require you to know early on in the progression of that, of your character, where you want to end up with, right? That's just, and now in a video game, you're built. In fact, actually, this is one of the things that I always find nightmarish, is the moment people start talking about how they build their character, and that becomes the default discussion, I know we did something wrong, right? Because one of the great strengths that RuneQuest has is characters get to develop more organically towards the stuff you're wanting to do through the play.
RuneQuest characters are built, they are grown.
They're grown, yeah. And so we started getting a lot of very positive feedback on how RuneQuest as a game engine makes it really easy to visualize and imagine what's going on, right? It's very immersive. And I hate, a lot of people like to talk about simulationism or game. I hate the big model. I think it's totally useless for game design discussion. What RuneQuest does is RuneQuest creates through play mechanics, it creates a very immersive narrative that even if you're not a strong GM, you don't have to be Matt Mercer, coming up with these brilliant descriptions of what's going on. You can just go, okay, Your character, you attack with the sword, but they manage to parry. You damage their sword, and some of it gets through, and it hits your right arm, and it's bleeding pretty bad. Right? That just comes right out of the mechanics. That is a tremendous, there's a tremendous appeal for that, for people playing role-playing games.
And there's a thing that I think we as long-time DRP players, RuneQuest players in particular, take for granted is that with the combat, if you're playing D&D or Pathfinder, the games which I like, by the way, but there's a tendency, if you're in a combat, you kind of like, you have your turn and you sort of wait.
It's
like passive, you know.
Yes.
Whereas in RuneQuest, it's kind of like the selling point being like, oh, you know, you also roll when you're being attacked.
Correct.
And there's a chance that you might then do that. And that even
There's a
that
much
makes it
greater,
kind of
so if you think about when you're playing RuneQuest, it's a much greater engagement as a player in what's going on. You don't have the classic 5e problem that it's my turn, I do everything that relates to me during my turn, and then I sit around and I wait 25, 45 minutes before it's my turn again. And if you have a single player in your group that has decision paralysis, and above 4th or 5th level in D&D, decision paralysis starts becoming a big issue, then it's longer than 45 minutes between turns, and you might very well have an hour.
Well, there's also an adrenaline involvement too.
Yes.
That's something I've said to people that are curious about RuneQuest when they play D&D or similar games like that is, you know that boss fight where everybody's on like 2 hit points, and the next dice roll like could decide it for everybody. Everyone's really engaged. Because of how RuneQuest works with its critical things like that, you are engaged with almost every single roll. Every single roll is the Well, RuneQuest is the only game I've run where some like highwaymen have come out, caught the players unawares, and said, hand over your money, and the players have said, well, how much do they want?
Yes.
Because they've already got the pike out.
Well, exactly. So you know, if we think about it, and this kind of is going back to how do we get more people in. We've got this great engine, but there's a lot of things in it that we can keep the engine, but there are things in it that it was great bringing Mike in because we were able to look at it fresh. And one of the first things he went is, what's the purpose? Not from a simulation or what's our justification for it. What's the purpose of strike rings? What are we trying to do with strike rings? And this, I went back to a big discussion, because we talked in RQG when we were designing it. Greg and Sandy and Steve Perrin and Ken Wilson were all giving their inputs on it. All of them wanted to keep strike rings. And the reason for keeping it, the design purpose of strike rings basically boils down to, if I have a missile weapon, I should always be able to attack before somebody with a regular handheld weapon, right? That's point number one. And the other really big one is, if I have a big, long, two-handed weapon, I should always be able to attack somebody coming into my area who has a regular handheld weapon. That's from a design, and whether or not you agree with that, that is the purpose of it as a rules mechanical system.
That comes from when they did isn't it?
It comes from the SEO.
Yeah, being a reenactor, that's kind of true.
Right, and the thing about that is if you think about what that does in play, the idea of it is your weapon matters. So in D&D or Pathfinder, your weapon doesn't matter, right? It's just a damage. It doesn't have any tactical relevance.
Depends on the enchantments the weapon has.
Well, that's only if it's magical. Yes, but so there's no real. There's no real difference between a dagger and a long spear, other than the amount of damage it does and what its potential, if you're playing on a grid, which is another key thing that we've been looking at. But if it's played on a grid, so if I've got a long range weapon, I can attack a little bit further away than somebody who's got it.
Yeah, which you can with the spear.
Yeah, so the downside of strike rings is strike rings are one of the 3 things that are obstacles for getting people into playing RQ. They just are. I find them easy. Hands up who have managed to internally make strike rings easy for themselves. and periodically spend time justifying this perverse system of trying to track stuff. Right, we all do it.
I mean,
It's more as a GM used to doing that.
Yeah, exactly. And we internalize it, but then when you're trying to explain to somebody else going, this is really cool, but wait, I now need to give you this complex, you now need to understand this complex and non-intuitive system. And this is one of the other things that RuneQuest in general has, is its mechanics are generally more intuitive than D&D or Pathfinder.
It's more complicated, and I think that's what put people off.
So, and also because almost all of us house rule it. Look at the rules, and then go, oh, that's how it works. Right? That's, you know, I'm being a little bit flippant, but it is one of the biggest bits of negative feedback. So Mike and I started working on, well, how can we get to the same results by structuring the round differently? Because what we wanted to avoid is that big D&D style, okay, we'll just do it off dexterity for everything. Well, then we get that long period of time together. And we end up coming up with a phase system. And we have tested that a heck of a lot.
it's just a white bear and red moon turned into a log.
That's actually, that was exactly it. It's just we ended up looking at board game mechanics.
Yeah.
It's actually something that
Magic, then this siren.
Can I show of hands anyone in this room who has done any play testing?
I've done it, I've got it, right.
Okay, so yeah, okay, a few people. All right. So you probably know a little bit more about what they're talking about. But
So, well, so that was one of them. The other big issue is what is the entry point for RuneQuest? And again, I'm sorry for using so much game design jargon, but I've been kind of like neck deep on that for the last couple of years. But so the entry point is, all right, we got a new group of players. Somebody has picked up our queue, they got really excited about it, they watched some, you know, they've been playing D&D, they've been really frustrated because D&D has a lack of, you know, they buy the idea that D&D has a lack of risk, which is one of the big complaints of the new edition. And it doesn't have, it's not very immersive, etc. Whatever their complaint about it is. So this isn't me saying RQ is a superior system. It's more if our market or our new players are probably people that, for one reason or another, are not satisfied with what 5e is giving them. They want something more or something different. So we go to RuneQuest, we go in and they pick up RQG and they pick up a couple of books and they log on to social media and instantly they're overwhelmed. Right? Sarter is, I love Sarter. I'm, you know, absolutely wanted to do stuff in Sarter, so did Greg when we started doing
how many
this.
werewolves are inside?
More than anywhere else per capita. Oh, I've got giant spreadsheets of this shit. But the problem with Sarter is if I'm starting, did have what is arguably one of the single best entry points, period, for new players in fantasy role-playing games, and that has. So the default is going, and the reason it is I can be, you know, aware of what the basic tropes of an RPG are, but I want to try something different. But I can understand I'm an adventurer, right? I'm an adventurer in Pavis. I can have a diverse group of folk because we're you know, there's a lot of different types of people in New Pavis, and I know what my initial activity is. I'm going to go into the big, and you guys are going to hate the words that I'm using here, the big mega dungeon that Greg put next to New Pavis, right? And it's a super easy entry point. And the neat thing about it is that unlike most settings like this, the more you go into the big level, the more you learn about Corinth as a setting. You start learning about the importance of clan and tribe structure. You start learning about weird things like the Empire of the Worm's Friends or the Godlearners, whatnot, but you learn it through play. You don't learn it as this initial upfront, here's the encyclopedia stuff that you need to know before you game. You can learn it the way most of us did, which is through play. And so this has been the other big design element on this is let's make sure that the default entry point is one that has the least barriers to jump in.
So we're about half an hour. So we've got one more slide to show you, and then we're going to do some questions. Now I imagine a lot of you have a lot of questions for Jeff. I know a lot of you, like Jeff, can probably talk for many hours about RuneQuest. Given the fact that we've got a half hour, everybody's collected time, I want to remind everyone that a question is usually 1 to 2 sentences long. And if you feel the need to say what you think about something or make a comment, you can say that for Jeff's personal email at the end, or you can
thank you.
doing that. Okay, so Jeff, one more thing to share.
Yeah.
Just want to say this is not final.
Correct, it's not final.
Mock-up, but it'll just talking about what you're saying there. You know we don't do brew in RPG, right? So there's not going to be any brew.
Oh, there's one. Yeah, the brewer batch.
Yeah.
So this is the mock-up cover there. This is Luik is doing the covers for our cube. This is the one for the core rule book. He's got a parallel cover for the Game Master's book, which comes out at the same time of it. So people are going, well, where is the much vaunted Game Master book? It's actually been sitting there, but we realized there's no point in doing the RuneQuest Glorantha Game Master book if we're also coming out at the same time with the new version of RuneQuest that has the Game Master book with a bestiary inside it right there.
You kind of kept the position of the woman in armor as well.
Yep.
But you could change the creature she's fighting.
Yep. And also, for people that have been looking at those cults covers, Luik and I have a big love of having kind of central figures that there's stuff going on around it, and so we kind of kept to that sort of art design sensibility of it. And yeah, it's a short book too. It's about the same size as RQ2, but a heck of a lot prettier.
John has any questions?
Are the previous books forward compatible or backwards compatible?
So what I've got to do. So one of the things, and this really was tough for Mike to internally process. I don't think he ever really has managed to quite. At Chaosium, it's very rare that we make something that is intended to destroy the back catalog, right? So often in the tradition of TSR and in WotC, a new edition is intended to force everybody to buy the whole thing again. So the key things in terms of if I want to use the older material, the one thing that I will be doing is in character creation, I've done tighter cult packages for the newer edition. There will be an updated one. So if I want to play an initiate of X Cult, we're going to have a free downloadable PDF that has the updated.
It'll be like a conversion guide for the new stats of a weapon or anything like that. But I think most importantly, everything from RPG, lore-wise especially, is obviously still.
Yeah, and the other bit about it is RQ2. It's also I wanted to make sure that I could do that I didn't validate how I play the game, which is I often take RQ2 material and I'm being lazy that day, and I just run it with whatever the current system is, and it's not a whole lot of work. That being said, if I'm a new player, or a new GM, I'm not going to be expected to do any of that sort of conversion. So the idea is to get them as much playable content using the new system that they don't have to do any work for as possible.
I'm quite happy, to be honest, that you're doing there, and the fact that it gets new blood in, and gets people opportunity for it. I have plenty of it. So I don't mind personally. I don't know, it's big advertising like the rest of us, but if it gets new content, because obviously at some point we're not going to be here, and it gets new people and keeps the game something we love going.
Well, and the other bit is to me, the what are the core elements of RuneQuest? And we spend a lot of time thinking, what makes something RQ? And okay, what makes it? 1 is that, visceral, immersive combat system that generates its own story from the combat. Right? That's kind of a clunky way of describing it, but that's really, to me, that is one of the absolute essential features of calling something RQ. Everybody has magic, essential feature of RQ, and a skill development. Basically, your character is defined by their skills and abilities that they start with a particular group of whatever it is, but what they become as the character develops is what they do in play.
That's cult's important.
Yeah.
Yeah, another question. People that are playing RuneQuest, I'm sorry, this is longer than 2 sentences. But finding players online to play with, people are spread around on so many platforms and stuff, and there's no real dedicated. You go here to play RuneQuest. Here is where you find people that love RuneQuest. It is really hard finding players.
Yeah,
I actually even put up, just a couple of weeks ago, I put up an ad on the RuneQuest Chaosium Chaosium forum. Nothing. I mean,
there is if you're looking to play online specifically, probably one of the best places if you're not in the official Chaosium Discord yet, there's a channel for every one of our games, and there's also specifically people looking for
I was saying that I just put up that one up for a month. I didn't get any results, and then one guy hacked it my thread and he got results.
Yeah,
So,
that's
I mean,
which is an absolutely fair point, and that actually ties into an accompanying piece I really don't want to go into in great depth, but also how RuneQuest is marketed to individual game stores and conventions to make sure that there is, 2 things. One, opportunity to play. So to work with game stores and make sure that there is possibilities like through things like organized play, where we work with game stores that buy material from us to make sure that there's RQ activities going on. Work with conventions. But the other bit is raising the profile of RQ in general, because if people don't know what it is, it's a lot harder to say, hey, who would like to try this?
because just to follow up here, if you don't mind, on Road 20, for example, you have a strong presence with Call of Cthulhu. A lot of people go there to play Call of Cthulhu, but you haven't got the same presence for RQ.
Yeah.
The character sheets are not.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
all we can't really get into.
We can't really get into that.
Yeah.
We absolutely know about that.
Yeah.
You can play on Quest Portal,
You can play on Quest Portal.
play on the Foundry.
You can play on the Foundry. And I don't want to go any further into that, and it's not that I'm trying to dodge the issue, it's just that there are things that we're engaged in that I'm not really at liberty to talk
Sorry,
about.
we have
New content would be lovely. I know there's been some stuff worked on with Abyss Big Rubble,
Yep.
bringing it up to date. Is that going to be released? Because there's new players, new gems.
Okay, so the initial product path, is that okay for me to just talk about them?
Don't get too far.
Yeah, we'll get to more.
That's full.
First 4, which will be all out when the thing is launched.
That's 5, I think it's one.
Yeah, it's actually 5.
Yeah.
But right off the bat, core rules, GM's book with Bestiary, a 4-part campaign that is also the first expansion of various types of backgrounds and cults. We have a player aid pack, and then it just gets in that we have to have a cadence of scenario books. One thing that is very different, and one of the things on Pipeline, that when I started working at Chaosium in 2015, we were still in what I would call the Kickstarter mode of book production. And what people wanted, or what everybody in the industry thought people wanted, was bigger, fatter books, right? Because we could talk about how many page count this was going to be on Kickstarter. And we were convinced by doing that got people excited. And it got people excited, but they would have been excited about all sorts of other things, like maybe the book showing up earlier. So one of the other things is, if I don't want to slow things down by doing big books. I want books to be between 64 and no more than 256 pages. And you can see that with the cults books. That's, to me, that's an optimal size of a book, because I can bring that out relatively frequently.
The other side to that is that the new rulebook being too big is any excuse for a new player to be like, oh, maybe that's too much.
Correct.
So, yeah.
Correct. So just for what it's worth, the new rule book is going to be about the size of RQ2. And that frees us up to put a lot more focus on writing scenarios. And I actually have a team right now that have a couple of names that maybe some of you all know involved on it, but they're not people that...
we haven't said names just yet.
No, let's not say
no,
that. But basically folk that are there to churn out scenarios.
Question?
It goes back to that gentleman's question. The one thing appealing, because where D&D can say it's got like the adventurers guild put in, Pathfinder's got the haphazardly, and then we have the cults of chaos, but there's kind of no like that official thing, and that's kind of the thing to drive people.
If you carefully think about what I've been talking about, you might be able to parcel exactly on the same page with that.
I wouldn't say that.
Correct.
How much will these new releases delay the other releases that are planned for the pipeline for the regular rules?
I think it's safe to say they won't.
They won't.
Yeah.
This is the next thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But without getting into too much detail, we have people working on both to a degree. Like, so it's not going, one is not going to affect the other in terms of, okay. Honestly, the biggest thing that's going to delay us is Somali pirates or
shipping issues.
This might be something that's already been covered. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
It might be saying you could start can't answer. When I'll play online now, because all my friends I wouldn't be able to play if there weren't decent kind of character sheet that's on one of the platforms like Roll20.
Yes, again, we are on that page on that. That is part of our defined package of things that will be ready in place in time for the release.
Yeah, just briefly talk about the differences in the new character sheet.
Oh yeah, so another thing about this, God, this was kind of entertaining. So we started started going through the character sheet, and like every character sheet that I ever do, we have a long tradition of character sheets being arranged by type of thing, right? Is this a skill? Is this a spell? Is this my combat bit? In alphabetical order, in a nice organized manner there, in a way that makes sense for people who have a long tradition doing it. The new character sheet actually lumps all your abilities around what type of activity it is, as opposed to a big alphabetical sheet. And the idea, and this was something Ken Rolston really hammered home, is Uncle Ken believes that all character sheets for TTRPGs wouldn't even pass the beta level of proposal of a video game, because they're all, the user experience is terrible. And they basically presuppose that you understand how everything works together. In your character sheet, you're really the function of your character sheet in play. And I know I'm saying this a lot, where I'm talking about, well, what do we do with this thing when we're playing the game?
Cross off hit points mostly.
What?
Cross off hit points.
Cross off hit points, but also it's there when I'm stuck. Right? So I go and I kind of know, usually pretty early on in the character, I kind of could know the really quickly kind of core things that my character does. But then, you know, I get stuck invariably, and I try to look, I use the character sheet to come up with something that I can do. And a big, long alphabetical list of skills doesn't really facilitate that. And so the new character sheet is much more designed about how the character sheet is used during play, as opposed to how it's used as a record keeper.
Right, sorry, I'm not sure.
Another question, let's see some hands up before I go back.
Have you got a rough idea of release date?
date specifically.
Or cause.
Yeah, I hate giving out dates,
It's
but
I think it's, what time, what day is it now?
A decade.
I would safely say that by this time next year.
I would say safe.
Can we hold it
before this time?
Before this, I was going to say by this time next year, you will probably have books if you want them. Yeah.
Thanks very much.
Okay, cheers, thanks. And that's for those first. And did you talk about play aids?
No, I didn't talk about play. So this is something else.
The fifth thing that's coming out.
Yeah. So we're gonna have a play aid package. Who all's familiar with Pathfinder cons? It's the cardboard standees. You know, things to basically have some terrain. God, it sounded really terrible here, but have something where I can have my cardboard standees, I can put them down, and if we have a combat, we now have something that we can interact.
So Jeff, does that mean that I have to use minis?
No.
Or you are, okay.
No. No. But the thing is that
Lots of
if
people
you,
like you.
not just lots, the best data that I've been able to put together is that in the United States, most tabletop role-playing games are played with some sort of a positional locator. So maybe that's a standee, maybe that's a miniature, maybe that's something on the VTT platform that shows where the characters are on this. But that is the majority of all games are played that way. And there are an awful lot of players that assume that that is necessary in order to play a game. If we don't make that possible for people to play that, you've just knocked off possibly half your potential audience because you haven't given the tools that they think they absolutely need to have in order to play. And this is also one of the problems with you know, the other thing is that people want to have ways to kind of, here is my cool RuneQuest standees or my cool RuneQuest minis. So it's something that they can be able to buy and play around with because people like to do that.
Yeah, so looking at the market opportunity, this big growth that's happening out there, in terms of allocating resources, is it better to put it into the TT players or the VTT players?
Well, there is and the VTT market is it's also in big transition right now. I mean, if you really carefully follow what's going on here, there's definitely a lot of shake-up there. There are, you know, a lot of the kind of first generation of VTT platforms kind of developed out of, hey, this is a cool idea, but they're not really well built. You can now see new ones coming in that are much more focused on making it a heck of a lot easier and a heck of a lot faster to be able to have that character support, to be able to have that stuff built into it. So we have to be aware and build it for VTT, but we also have to make sure that the table...
And to be clear, it's not like focusing on... We're still making a tabletop role-playing game.
Correct.
And in terms of how it changes what we're doing, I think the biggest thing, you can correct me if I'm wrong, the biggest change that makes in terms of our development is that when we get a piece of art done for a monster, we need to make sure it's appropriate for the visual token.
And for standing.
And for standing, yeah.
Right.
It's not informing the design. You know, you make
The only bit about it is that one thing is RQG had a tremendous number of rules subsystems in it. The more rule subsystems you have, the more difficult it is to do a VTT adaptation. Right? So if you look at some of the simplification that we have in that, that's also to make it easier to do that.
Didn't really get to ask my question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
The question was, in terms of resource allocation, where is the bigger market opportunity in growth? VTT or TT? You just said, I think, yes, okay, the TT market in the US has really grown massively. On a global scale, looking at the market potential as a whole,
I would still say,
I would
say, okay, so I would look at this as you have face-to-face games, you have games that are played VTT, right? I assume that's how you're so.
Yeah.
Okay.
Online or not online.
Face-to-face is definitely bigger than VTT now, and it's growing. VTT it had this big spike during COVID, and its numbers definitely dropped back down. People like the social activity. Now, that may not be our experience, right? Because we are in a particularly small, and we're basically, I hate to say this, we're mature customers who are, basically very used to this. If you look at one of the things I've been fascinated by is my daughter's school district. The single biggest after-school activity in the school district is not athletics. It's the D&D club, right? They have in every single school, once a week, between 50 and 150 kids playing D&D after school. They're playing face-to-face, right? Because at the end of the day, gaming is a social, it's a heavily social activity. Now we play VTT because it's easier to schedule and it's convenient, but whenever, there's always this pushback of, but people want to play face-to-face.
In the UK, that's all like we more on the games workshop really aggressively push more on the schools.
Yeah, it's more like it did. So it just sort of want to answer your question. When it comes to our